Hi there, I'm going to answer a couple of the questions here from Module 7, the clarification questions from Module 7. The first one, again by Joseph Carollo, it's the most popular one. I see that some people have responded to the question, which is always good to see. I don't respond in the text, I always respond by video, but it's good to see that different students are responding to one another. I want to say, yeah, I kind of agree with that first one, right, in terms of the structural realism is a theory of international relations that says power is the most important factor in international relations. I think realism also sort of says that on its own. Neorealism probably comes about with Ken Waltz, who I mentioned actually in the last video, sort of fortuitously. But it's this idea of simplifying realism, right? Stripping out a lot of the detail from realism and really having it about structure. Ken Waltz he's famous for one of his most famous theories is about um, uh, the distribution of power in the world system, right? So are we living in a bipolar system where there's two great camps opposed to each other that have all of the powers vested in those two great camps? Think the Cold War, right? That's when he's writing it. Or is it unipolar, right? We have one single power. Everything is based in one state, maybe, right, or a group of states. He's not interested in sort of states and differences between states. He's interested in the power distribution, which is why it can be quite reductionist neorealism. There's less. It looks at less, right? It looks. If you remember the photograph from the last versus the picture or the schematic, it strips the most out of the picture, strips the or I guess it makes its picture is much less detailed. It's the difference between the detail of the picture of neorealism and the picture of and the photograph is much bigger than most other theories in terms of the difference between those things. Yeah. So he's got unipolar systems, bipolar systems, and multipolar systems, and he says with that assessment, with being able to tell, is it a multipolar, is it a bipolar, or is it a multipolar system, a unipolar, multipolar, bipolar? In that, then we can tell just by looking at that, not looking at anything else, not looking at who's in charge of which countries, not looking at which countries are communist and which countries are not communist, not looking at anything else in the world, just the distribution of power. Then we can tell, is there going to be, is there going to be more or less conflict in the world? Right, and so neorealism sort of prides itself, and Ken Waltz is the sort of father of neorealism. They pride themselves on the ability to strip a lot of the information out, a lot of the detail out, and to be able to make strong predictions about what the world will look like based on just how is power distributed in the system, what's the structure of power. So hopefully that brings a little bit of background for you, Joseph, and all those who voted the question. But the important thing about this week really is not neorealism. We've moved on from that, but neorealism is the foil of constructivism, right? Constructivism wants to add. The reason why neorealism sort of figures probably in Wendt's piece is it's kind of an easy target because we strip a lot away with neorealism. It opens itself up very easily to the accusation that it's reductionist, that it's missing something, right? And so that's a great opportunity for Wendt, right, and the constructivists to come and say, here, you're missing something, and here's what it is, right? So definitely the concentration in Module 7 should be about the what is constructivism, right? This is the introduction to constructivism. And sure, it does define itself oftentimes in opposition to neorealism, which is for the reason I just said. But the next question is how long does it take for social structure to develop into something that's not just talk? That's a great question. It was upvoted by 20 of you. Samantha Mears, very good question. And I don't think it's one that anybody answers, right? I don't think it's one that Wendt answers, but it's an important question for the following reason, right? Social structure is for Wendt the thing that makes the power structure, right, of neorealism. It's the thing that makes it mean anything. Right? Constructivism, it's one of the things that it's trying to answer, right, is that great quote, the very famous quote from the reading, right, that what is it, like 5, what should be more scary? What should be more threatening to the United States? Should it be 5 North Korean nuclear missiles or 300 British nuclear missiles or nuclear warheads or missiles? The neorealists can't really answer that question. Right? That question is really meaningless to neorealism in that it, and maybe even to be fair, well, definitely to neorealism. And it's meaningless to neorealism because neorealism doesn't care about the differences between states. It doesn't care. It doesn't recognize that North Korea means something different to the United States than the United Kingdom. It doesn't recognize that. It's about material power. It's about the distribution of power. Who has the material power? Where is that material? Not who has it, but where is, how is that distributed? Is it distributed all in one pile, in 2 piles, or more than 2 piles? So the fact that Britain has 300, that's a distribution of material capabilities, but the difference between Britain and North Korea, it can't be. That's not something that neorealism really deals with. Right? Constructivism comes and says that's a lack of neorealism. Here's what we'll add that back into the conversation because social structures, and by social structures, what we're talking about is it's the result in the world of shared understandings. Right? We sort of understand. We have a large shared understanding among people, but among leaders of states, perhaps, that North Korea is an enemy to the United States, and the United Kingdom is a friend to the United States. And how long has that taken to build up? Right? How long has it taken to build up? Has it always been the case? Right? Certainly, like, I suppose if we sort of took those nuclear weapons back to the 18th century, right, when Britain and the United States were enemies, then those nuclear weapons would mean something different. The British nuclear weapons I'm talking about would mean something different if they had them, right, in the 18th century. It would mean something different to the United States than they do now, right? So there is clearly some change there, right, over time, and Wendt talks about that, right? He says it's not rigidly fixed, but it doesn't. The not just talk comment is interesting because it doesn't. It's not. We can't just talk ourselves out of it. Right, we couldn't just, if a few people stood up tomorrow and says, we shouldn't worry about the North Koreans, we should worry about the British. What we'd have to see, right, and what, in order for the social structure to change, that wouldn't be enough. Because he says the social structure, it's about practices, right? It's about how do we behave, how do we act. So instead of being in, one of the things that we do, right, is we have NATO and the top brass of the United States, the military of the United States and the military of Great Britain meet together with the other members of NATO, meet together regularly with them. Not only do they meet together regularly, but they have a permanent building, a permanent headquarters where they have representatives that are constantly in there working together, right? So that's a practice. That's something that we, maybe at one point it was an idea that somebody spoke out loud, right? But that's not enough. It became a practice, right? It became something that we do. The Five Eyes, right? Five Eyes is an intelligence sharing operation between English-speaking countries, right? Let me see if I get them all. UK, USA, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. There we go. I've got Five Eyes. That's an organization. It's a practice. It's something that we do. We meet together and we share intelligence together. And so it's these sorts of social practices. These who do we talk to? Who do we not talk to? Who do we meet with? Who do we not meet with? That's part of it, right? When Britain tests new military technology, we behave in one way. We probably don't even mention it. I don't know. I don't remember the last time we mentioned it. I don't think it's because we've not tested new nuclear technology. We have actually Britain has 2 new aircraft carriers now, brand new, just built. Did we hear about that in the United States? Not in the same way that we heard about North Korea testing their missiles, right? And so it's different practices, right? Not just the meetings, not just the institutions, not just the talk, but we behave in different ways when different countries do the same thing, right? That's and how long will that take to change is the question, right? And that's a good question. It's a question I probably don't have an answer to, and probably depends on a lot of things. But yeah, it's a good question, because with the British example, right, we can see over time that the United States, that Britain's come to mean something different to the United States, probably since the 40s, probably maybe since the Second World War. And so, is it about time, or is it about shared experiences, right? That practice, what if the United States hadn't have come into the Second World War and fought alongside Britain, right? Would our relationship be different, right? Would our shared understanding of that relationship be different? And the answer is no doubt yes. Would be very different, I would expect. And so it might not just be about time, but it might be about specific. Well, certainly it's about practices. That's what Wendt says. But thinking about practices, they occur under certain conditions, at certain points in history. They begin, and so it's well worth thinking in those terms for that. All right, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much for the questions, both of you, both Joseph and Samantha, both provocative questions that led us into some interesting paths, some good paths. Do look at, if you are worried about neorealism, try not to worry too much. There won't really be any questions about neorealism. Try and do that reading in the context of what is constructivism, right? What is constructivism? As a theory, what does it do? All right, and so thank you for listening, and I will look forward to seeing your midterm exams and grading those. Any questions? Feel free about the exam. Feel free to email me.